Hello folks. In 1868, Andrew Johnson became the first American president to be impeached. It wouldn't happen again for another 130 years when Bill Clinton was in the firing line. 20 years after that, it was Donald Trump's turn. Not once, but twice in one term. On every occasion, the president has been acquitted. And it might not be that long before we go again. This time, Joe Biden's under the gun. Biden is preparing for a bad set of numbers at the midterms this November, which means his political opponents will be coming after him. The New York Times reported over the weekend that Joe Biden's legal team is preparing to defend against an expected onslaught of oversight investigations by congressional Republicans should they take one or both chambers in the midterm elections, including preparing for the possibility of impeachment as payback for the two impeachments of President Donald Trump. According to the report, the reasons are many. Some Republicans want to focus on Mr. Biden and his family, particularly the foreign business dealings of his son Hunter. Other reasons include the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan and the surge in migration across the southwestern border. Our resident political analyst Joe Siracusa thinks it's a near certainty because impeachment is a political weapon these days used to settle scores.
They're going after him, the kid. They're going to go after his performance.
On what grounds, Joe?
Well, they're going to go after incompetence. You know, he may be a little tired and sleepy sometimes, but he was smart enough to hire a first-class lawyer to represent him.
If there's one person Joe Biden will be thanking this week, it's Will Smith for taking him off the front pages and out of the headlines. And here it was, in case you missed it, the moment the Oscars went south and very fast.
Oh, wow! Wow!
Even though Will Smith originally laughed at the gag, he clearly changed his tune. His wife Jada has struggled with alopecia in the past, an awful hair loss condition, and she didn't appreciate the joke. So rather than just not laugh at it and maybe say something later, Will got up on stage, slapped the host, Chris Rock, verbally abused him, then returned to his seat and sat there as if nothing had happened. Then in what became compulsive viewing, Smith won the Best Actor gong, the highest point of his career, and doubled down with platitudes.
I want to be a vessel for love. I want to be an ambassador of that kind of love and care and concern.
I had no interest in watching these awards. I never do, but especially not this year, because with the world the way it is, the virtue signalling would have ended me. Joe Biden isn't having a great time of things at the moment, is he? The White House mop is getting a heavy workout. Mop, rinse, mop, rinse. And Biden only has himself to blame. Gaffe number one. Last week, during a rare press conference after an extraordinary NATO summit in Brussels, Biden took a question about sanctions. After all, it had been a month since he and much of the Western world announced heavy sanctions that would supposedly stop Vladimir Putin in his tracks.
Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that.
Huh? We keep talking about that. Mate, it's what your own administration is talking about.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence.
The purpose of the sanctions, in the first instance, is to try to deter Russia from going to war.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter.
They're meant to prevent and deter a large-scale invasion.
We want them to have a deterrent effect.
The sanctions are designed in the first instance to try to deter Russia from taking further aggression.
As well as our efforts to both try to deter Russia through sanctions.
If you pull the trigger on that deterrent, well, then it doesn't exist anymore as a deterrent.
Gaffe 2. In Poland over the weekend, in what was supposed to be the most important speech of his presidency, Biden, talking about Vladimir Putin, went off script again.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
That sounds an awful lot like a demand for regime change to me. The White House must have thought so too, because it moved very quickly to grab that mop. Here's the Secretary of State attempting to clean it up.
I think the President, the White House, made the point last night that, quite simply, President Putin cannot be empowered to wage war or engage in aggression.
No. Empowered is not what Biden said. Well, not that he ever really went anywhere, but Donald Trump is back in a big way. Ever since he was thumped by Joe Biden 2 years ago, Trump has been teasing a return. He may have been silenced on Twitter, but his reach and influence still extends far beyond social media. Just look at his rallies. They still get decent turnouts, and his quotes have been getting more and more airtime lately. Trump is running again, let's be honest, because he's still the boss of the party. If a Republican challenger in any race wants to get anywhere, he or she needs Trump's endorsement. Let's look at last week's Ohio Senate primary, for example. J.D. Vance is the best-selling author of the book Hillbilly Elegy, and in the past has said some pretty nasty things about the former president.
The political leaders that they choose really holding their feet to the fire and asking that they do things that will actually address their problems. I think, frankly, that's a big problem with Trump, is that he diagnoses the problems in a very successful, very passionate way, but I don't see him as offering many solutions.
Sensing this was a problem for his career, Vance changed his tune to claim Trump was actually a good president who did some great things for the country and then received a coveted endorsement. What happened? J.D. Vance won the primary.
The president is right. I wasn't always nice, but the simple fact is he's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
The other interesting element about this is that state senator and challenger Matt Dolan didn't get the endorsement because Dolan had accused Trump of perpetuating lies about the outcome of the last election. He said that in the past. Dolan finished third. The new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is a good bloke with a great story who grew up in council housing with a single mum on a disability pension. He became a student activist who once boasted of fighting Tories. During his time as opposition leader, Albanese was forced to move to the centre. But his win over the weekend was thanks in part to Greens party preferences and also wins the Greens picked up, which now gives them the balance of power in the Senate. This and a big swing to independence was seen as a rebuke by climate-conscious voters who think the current parties aren't doing enough. To recap some Greens policies, it wants net zero by 2035, a ban on the construction of oil, gas and coal infrastructure, wants to phase out mining, burning and the export of thermal coal by 2030. Here's the Greens on defence. It wants to abolish the Australian Border Force, slash defence spending. It also believes China poses no threat to Australia and wants to scrap agreements, including AUKUS, and all that comes with it. Labor has a different position on all of those policies. It says it won't do deals, and in the lower house it may not have to because Labor should govern with a majority. But here's the kicker. In the Senate, the Greens, as I mentioned, hold the balance of power with their largest ever presence in the upper house, and so could determine Labor's policy agenda. Xi Jinping and his predecessors are masters of the long game, and we are very quickly learning how patient and clever they had been. 6 weeks ago, at the start of our election campaign, China signed a security deal with the Solomon Islands, which will allow China to have a military presence a few thousand kilometres off the North Queensland coast. Then last week, as a new government here was sworn in, its foreign minister announced on a tour of the South Pacific that it was seeking similar deals with not one, but up to 10 island nations in our region. If those deals are to be signed, and those poorer nations will be tempted by promises of cash, it would disrupt sea lines of communication between Australia and the US. It cuts off American assistance if we need it. It makes it harder for the Australian Defence Force to reach, say, Taiwan, whenever conflict erupts. China, if it's not already, will be the regional hegemon and continues its ultimate goal of displacing the American order. Fortunately, many of those Pacific Island nations were a step ahead. In Fiji yesterday, something of a development. China's ambassador walked back its proposal for a regional agreement, but it won't stop unilateral talks, and there's just no way that they will give up on getting something over the line eventually. Still the Solomon Islands, East Timor, Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, Vanuatu, to name just a few that China has shown interest in. And that's just not going to end. The security deals only just came to our attention in recent weeks and months, but China has had them in the works for years. So, as I mentioned, they won't just give up. I've found myself asking this question many times in recent weeks, and today I'm asking it again. What is the point of the United Nations? After months of tension and military build-up at Russia's border with Ukraine, a threat totally clear, President Vladimir Putin commanded his troops go in. He called it a special military operation. But essentially, he declared war on his neighbour. At that very moment, when Russian troops crossed the border and launched the first attacks, over in New York, the UN was squabbling over condemnation that never came. The 15-member Security Council was voting on a resolution to condemn the invasion. If the text was successful, it would have demanded that Moscow immediately stop its attack and withdraw all of its troops. As it turned out, though, there was a big problem. Russia was this month's chair of the Council. What a coincidence. According to the UN model, the chairman's role is to see that the committee produces a result that is immediately acceptable to all, or at least an overwhelming majority of delegates. 11 Security Council members voted in favour of the resolution. China, India and the UAE abstained, which shouldn't be forgotten. China's position won't surprise anyone, while India's silence is best explained by the fact that it buys 23% of Russia's total arms exports.